I'm ready.
We are all three judges here, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure. I'm just other camera on yet. We don't have to.
I don't, I mean, they didn't say anything. Where is Habiba is not here.
The one she's consent.
Do we have confirmation that Habiba is judging online? Or, 'cause I'm not.
Yeah, I believe I see them. So. Everyone got the one machine? Yeah? Okay. Anti-blackness and genocide, materially and ideologically structural medieval, feudal, and capitalist structure, forms of property, modes of production, assert the expansion of Anglo-Saxon racial purity as a conduit for regimes of intervention, instability, rights, and democracy. As black bodies are ontologically figured through a liberal economy for whites to disavow their disinvestment in the predatory nation-state form, the global racial order transcends into a value form of slavery and conquest that feeds off racial violence to develop Western civilization and capitalism. Both send. Pictures of medieval structure around racial domination, course of hegemonic generated ways of life that negated humanist African Americans. Constructed transformation of African captives to Atlantic commodities and degenerate event for racial domination in the New World. With racial slavery, there's a traumatic event that created a social wound. Even when we're not born into the path of slavery, Marco's life, an individual, black life becomes liberatory with slavery contributing into social trauma of our body, separated with significance, and black racism becomes a repetition. Interred education, income levels, access to health and care, and incarceration. A form of racial neutrality becomes being made, remade, therefore adapted to the moment. That black body remains historical right. American democracy has not before, never fully able to confront anti-black racism as a consequence of racial slavery. The American democracy is nothing about race for democracy. The problem lies in democracy is a political equality, binary inclusion or exclusion. This vacuum from social legacies, making any analysis of racism reducible to lack of formal procedure equality that can be solved with a different procedure of representation. What is clearly required is another view of democracy from the perspective of slaves whose ideas have been erased from the body politic and status quo neo-imperial projects of cast the empire as immoral in the form of regional conflict started or instigated by the U.S. and underdeveloped economies created by the anti-competitive strengthening of global racial alliances, where democratic host countries are initiated into the liberties of the empire as natural byproducts of American exceptionalism. Therefore, democracy functions through its collective memory loss in the deployment of modern cultural and racial classifications between indigenous, social, savage, and African biological and or ontological slaves, which means as racialized body entered the market as workers freely exchanging labor power, they bring the form of slavery, racial slavery, and conflict with them, reconstituting a regime of quotidian violence. Robinson 16. Could be democratic regimes use force to repel those minorities or compelled to remain within territorial limits of the nation, suggest that the state had the right and duty to protect itself by proceeding into the barbarism of the war under the conditions of applied forces. Western historical experience, democracy has seriously corrupted the democratic theory. Who are the people? The utilitarian services precludes concern for the poor and the slave. This does invade institution literature and social agencies and manipulative liberal democratic philosophy corrupts the democracy with considerations of well-recognized analogies to the market, beliefs in the individual and utility, a state for preservation of their lives, class certification, certainly the people choosing the proper bourgeoisie, upper class laws, all before the political institution where the constitution of the people, the people have been removed to the driver authority and people to an instrument The destruction of man's authority, metaphysical and social aspect of political thought by persistence in the pursuit of order rather than democratic states, distinction between Western, non-Western, democratic, and non-democratic development under the political paradigm, and transition wars are inevitable and coming now. COVID-19, the 2000 economic downturn, ecological collapse, nuclear war, the industrial revolution, and economic growth represent the will to knowledge surrounding the political and economic narrative of democracy. Formally politicized acts of law, ideology, justify imperial frameworks that establish ontological true system based in existentialist and rationalist discourse, and improving images of technology and violence where individuals become an instrument to be controlled and destroyed. 15. Leader warned of existential threat for the projection of American power. If no external threat exists, one has to be manufactured driven. But how to expand U.S. hegemony? The distinction between empire meaning is ruling causes great fear and anarchy. The laws of control by those that exercise international relations are desires to dominate others in order to prevent chaos. Genocide violence is not a byproduct of one to deploy for regime change. Life has neither positive nor negative value. It is simply irrelevant. No number in the calculus about how many deaths do bring into the bargaining table. And necrophilius orientation church from organic mechanic fate of uncontrollable nature. Everything that threatens law and order fails the possibility of nuclear war. Yet they seemingly make no effort to avoid it. Western military leaders offer global conflagration rather than diminution of power and rationalization of humanists in order to win the game. The inevitable outcome of environmental collapse under capitalism's rational to regard climate change and environmental crisis as powerful force multipliers and conflict, environmental collapse entail an increase of interest-based violence, war, poverty, environmental collapse, and other catastrophes that are modern existence or inextricably linked. The main achievement of the nation state uniform grid of police barriers across the world, international consistent with the rise of the EU, IMF, and the World Bank, wars, the health of the state, mystic devotion becomes a man of human value, and the values united to be sacrificed, of course, in the process of governance, and wars, follow all things to come through, indicator wars, absent of the development of sedentary existence with ecological crisis, agriculture, give rise to classes the state to reconcile by arrogating to itself monopoly of legitimate violence, appeals to human desire for solidarity and belonging, and as well as fear, cultivated by to mystify crisis, artificial surrogate for real community, psychological change gave meaning to sort of the public ritual that linked hierarchy to civil war on a global scale. Mark the car at scale. And the ongoing transition war is against Black revolutionary organizing and militant, reduces them to a mere function organized under conscious consumerism. Bourgeois financial and political technologies posed as radical humanitarianism, which fungibilizes and destroys Black being, accelerated the extinction of Black militancy through asymmetrical warfare. Jameson 1. Following vigilante murders of George Floyd, Arbery, and Brown, Taylor, the man, two metaphysical monopoly, the right, antiquated antitrust legislation, liberals seeking to reinvigorate antitrust laws and algorithm to correct influential platforms to please funders and just reassure the general public of stable democratic structure without the need to revolutionary struggle. Stakeholders cited Black militancy as a justification for their brutality, objection, rejection, analysis of slavery as actual war, terrorism, not teaming warfare, and pushing within asymmetrical war, and Russia's war rebellions become processes resolve and dominate algorithm thus have seen the development of algorithm and community defensive pro-violence to civilians or police. Black citizens in the capital of Black power ski solidarity struggles that never had hegemony. Black citizens overshadowed Honey's murder, which preceded the lack of redistribution of land and resources to South African masses. Algorithm minimizes war against the sentence and disappears. Culture growth, de-emphasizing conservative reactionary political of attorneys general and judges, predator behavior, promotion. The algorithm assert that Black feminist leadership is the heir of the political mass rebellion as a vector in the intersectionality promotes and Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice deceived the public about the weapon of mass destruction. Obama, ambassador to the UNSC, Susan Rice, hinder UN peacekeepers from intervening in Rwanda genocide. Black women leaders are rejected to stand police reform by divestment, lower life for refuse to engage in racial bias by cutting CPD ranks. Mark the card ranks. Policy debate engages in anti-competitive business practices in perpetual fear of losing its fascist influence domestically and internationally. Scholarship package and ship for judges and service of the supply and demand of discussion, a marketplace of ideas where we transport, ship, trade, and evaluate the efficacy of flesh to sustain the operation of this activity as a weapon against Black and brown debaters. It must continue to reinvent ways that render Black debate unsovereign, formless, and informal. The system of debate does not want to see Black success in the market. Black arguments are viewed like dirt in the debate space. They are allowed, but only if clean for the liking of white and junior partner debaters alongside your judges. The marketplace regulation wants to limit what we say, how we say it, when we say it, all while ignoring why we say it. Therefore, we affirm anarcho-abolition as a normative proposition that enacts a prohibition on the property monopoly of anti-Blackness and anti-competitive practices as a result of the racial contract. Instead of top-down anti-truth law, we should focus on anti-Black and anti-brown market regulation and social movement. Debate 20. In anarchist society, prison will be done away with, courts and police replaced with community-run programs interested with the regeneration of social training rather than custodial supervision of inhumane lockup. This eradication need not to be one and done justice. Things to be done now between now and this planting of all prisons. Things done in the interim may not have to look at the abolition, but nonetheless to shy away from the political period and requisite for affiliation. The black anarchism can be found sometimes glimpses. Be loving anarchists, people of color, they critical resistance or Audrey Lowe Project. The point is, organizations arising from blackness are doing anarchic work without needing to affix the label. If they are centering blackness in radical movements, they are given the opportunity to think like anarchists. To think like an anarchist is the anarcho. To get anywhere, we understand, cultivate, and nurture the inherent anarcho within blackness, and blackness within anarcho. There have been many false started in that ends, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, the Democratic Party, classical anarchism. The swinging door of blackness is accommodating and generous. It has no bouncer and it looks to the future without wallowing in the past or present missteps of potential allies, let alone sympathy in the struggle, comrades. We must allow ourselves to be permeated by anarcho-blackness demands abolition. Anarchism is abolition. Finally, refusing the pseudo-humanism of this year's resolution affirms the transformative capacity of a new value, a new humanity, and plunges into a messy, chaotic, and beautiful decolonial world. Machanda 21. The study of normative whiteness can invoke Denis Freire de Silva's banalization of racial events and onto epistemological excision that structures political theory, race and racialism relegated to the realm of moral, social, and cultural distinction between self-determined and rational subject versus affectable or emotional ones. Wendy Brown failed to accord the beating of Rodney King for Brown. Rodney King beating had no political purchase, only when presented in recognizable form, which objects in the classification schema by skirting humanity to whiteness and blackness is cast aside knowledge, proposing a new frontier. Almost 30 years later, this call remains largely unheeded. Studies continue to dismount mundane forms of racial domination through fetishization of abstraction and desire to face violence, genocide, and theft, and mark the encounter between the West and the West and the birth of discipline of international relations through its more human-focused version, articulation of peace. Mark the card at peace.
Okay. You good for Cross?
Yeah.
Okay. How does policy debate engage in practices that influence fascism domestically and internationally?
So what we're saying here is Revoke's card talks about how there's two ways in which racial domination exists. The first one is coercive, which is like incarceration, over policing and all that. The second is hegemonic, and it's like spaces like debate that are like a reflection of racial domination when we are forced to engage the space in a way that is normative, but that normative is obviously white, heteropatriarchal, and yeah.
Why is that space necessarily truly in such characterization?
Sorry, what was that?
I guess in broader terms, if debate is bad and produces those norms, why does the activity deserve to be redeemable?
Well, there is like an intrinsic value of debate as an activity,
What's
right?
that
It's not
intrinsic value?
simply just a game. This probably should answer that. It's not simply just a game, right? Like the way that we talk about things reflect the way that we have been affected by the world, and the way we talk about things in this space also reflect the way we can change the world, I suppose.
So debates has intrinsic good because it allows us to be informed about how we can change the world.
Well, there's
Through
to be reductionist about it. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Cool. So what is the role of the negative?
The role of the negative.
Yes.
The role of the negative is to disprove the desirability of the affirmative.
To disprove the desirability of the affirmative. Okay. I guess the Robinson card is like the U.S. has instigated regional conflicts. What does he have to do to stop U.S. hegemony abroad?
Well, instead of stopping U.S. hegemony abroad, we're stopping like U.S. hegemony right now, right here.
Okay. How do you do that?
Well, first of all, by engaging the space in a non-normative way, we allow ourselves to remove ourselves from the way this like space and activity has replicated the hegemonic forces of racial domination, right?
That somehow stops like transition wars from occurring.
Transition wars are inevitable. It's not like
So what does he have to do to resolve those things?
so see, this is kind of what we're talking about, right? This is like the whole point. Their questions are predicated on the status quo values of competition in this debate, right? They think that it's just like a input-output sort of solvency when
Okay.
we
So how does
literally
the app
change
view
that.
competition?
The views competition.
Well, it's like a coalition meeting, so we should discuss different tactics to reduce the harms like transition wars.
Okay, that makes sense.
Pulling it up on the email chat. Okay. One of these should be sent. Let me know when everyone gets it. It's 3.
Right?
Yeah. Okay, everyone good?
No.
Okay. Let me know. Khabib, are you good? Just a second. Good.
Topicality, the role of the violence from the excavator of a hyper also role of as for repeating option to get any kind of behavior or business methods that there's a competition without providing lower cost or higher quality of goods and services. OECD3, any kind of business with the support of business in which farmer trading competition and increase our position without providing goods and services at lower cost or higher quality, and expanding the scope must increase the area covered by antitrust law and noble 17 because conversion not the expansion is an increase in the volume area of the definition of correct and increase to increase the scope of violation, the affirmative and defend prohibitions on any kind of practices or by the private sector by expanding the scope of its courts laws. The event is clashed with us, scholars should have vacuum or myopic and breed reactionary generics. They allow the app to find its myth or infinite private advantage because all the app has to do is find evidence supporting an ideological orientation towards the world. This crosses clash because all of our very negative strategies are based on praxis, and by not having a clear accurate mechanism of lose 9% of all of negative ground, the app so retains traditional competence standards like terms and it being like impossible clash and intrinsic goodness out of the overall finance of the debate. Every debater is here for different reasons, and they trace back to the pedagogical uniqueness of the space and open tolerance iteration through style debates, no advocacies, lack of testing, and offering subtraction. The way these value stands on its own, trying to with judgment in the ballot is a hollow validation that siphons off of energy that draws them into the oppressive gaze of the academy of negative the client affirmation fills in that I can think of services around the world credit opposition companies that self investigation other critics that change the social organization but all the discussion that our communities in the economic all the subject nature of offering and hard taking together the traits and insights in the classroom and the less the person as a analysis of the economy of addressing whether the country should be examined in the first place. I believe it. Other research kind of be wrong or any the research also the perhaps the representation of blood was published in the most the effect as a energy and economic practice and the which we short access recognition in the place in the opportunities of abolitionist revolution for any changes and conditions all the other critics focusing on hint text and ordering comprehensible generally cover lists of objects of analyses of affecting them to all the cases dominant and revolutions of the economy and critique neoliberals realizing the discourse of competitive markets using metaphors to conceptualize debate remakes political speech in terms of free market ideologies. You don't have all the markets of the discourse of imaginations and the free articulations of life and the neoliberals realizing the work of metaphor and prevents imagine everything as a market around all the universities and all the ethics, aesthetics, and politics of the challenge of way distinguishing a little market from metaphorical markets that are no changes involving money. Metaphorical markets extend the market accompanying little metaphorical directly put understanding little depends on language and knowledge we perceive the world and that flip side of this is they discuss representation construction they say subject to articulation of what is the sake of imagine markets for everything the extension of market relations throughout society threatens ecological and social collapse in regard 19 economics and marches as seventh revolution extend replacing the economic system economics has become the dominant form of reasoning saving on nations become a process of designing economic incentives for individual actors in a new and social organizational system. This system will also need a system we have a new system of police emerge the economy of the period of representation the sphere and constant bias through the economy must be replaced with a new ism that is environmentally sustainable. We must reject economic metaphors and advocating for social justice. New frameworks based on resistance and trust and build alternative social capital in the marketplace of ideas of the hidden 15 or resistance, trust, spirituality, love, have been told help us better understand cultural social phenomenon and needs to learn and explain everything else on Disney to like metaphorical capital, resistance, trust, spirituality, and spirituality, love, or concepts and not quantifiable, not metaphorical capital, harder, organization, and powers and forms of language lost. The government structure and force assimilation of moving well to frameworks and ending capital resources will better serve this first one under capitals and another be another alternative. I'll actually actually read more cards than that. The concept of a competitive marketplace of ideas naturalized free market ideology. 214. Metaphors and information of utilization of metaphors and helped by analyses which instances are activity or living markets at the same time the scope market is an extending the scope feature as an extending is well known as the market and this is feature then the feature will literally determinist and by meaning what's in that market is feature of a single notion of the marketplace ideas are no longer about the eyes of expressive rights of running expression about the center of the search for truth is simply in derogatory metaphors and normal assertions on the decided reasons of analogical arguments and marketplace metaphor which has advances in the dynamic same assertion of markets themselves and the should be unregulated and a case of negative presumption when they can't solve for international application of fascism even if they cause it they may reorient they may have a different form of sovereignty than we conceive of it. They haven't explained it. They haven't given it a reason in any way of how they would have the app could literally resolve it. And even if they could resolve it in a more complex way, they still have to prove the app has a causal relationship to it. Number two, a single rounds and balance. So in fact, you have fundamental beliefs and orientations towards the world, the people watching the debate. Maybe you can over years and years and debates, but that single rounds not change our orientations toward the world because once we talk about it, instead, orientations made by social community building is pretty egalitarian, anti-racist, and the landfill, and the Apple landfill kind of popular support work, anti-monopoly, mobilization, culture building, and state reform requires constitution, abolitionist, and monopoly, dismantle state power, then check out corporate power, abolish order, pricing, challenge, always interconstitutional, some appeal, no impossibilities, party politics, and for United Socialism, and neoliberals, and monopoly socialists, advocate a picture of economic forms, or Republican insurance, and a substitute social term, and monopoly, stabilize, and prevent another harm, winning, and then come out with cost-based and races, and community interaction, organization of the communities, and independent class, and then vertical integration. I call it press and measure means legal repair permanent chemical rent and then see for some events of trespassing. Not unleash market venture farmers and fewer press and jurisdiction or away from great high tax. Markets have either got rules and trying to invest in the agriculture and every project says myself social system, how we power presses, little counter, how to feed innovation and how to we can power build it, economy name and all the interest of central combined with the projects again, but Western people call this is and already voters not called rights and enroll voters and any version of the rights. Other coalitions, thus the interest of being intolerance will mean the same reforms and differently will be rising collaboration, social time to support and the rules and symptoms and monopolists and accept solutions beside and even their impact framing depends upon fundamentally liberal values of freedom and equality. Their complaint is only the universalism is insufficient. Universal means there's a reinterpretation, not rejection of what humanism, totalizing rejection is reductionist, and anti-humanism is impure, but this is bad if not worse. Context and into their key, and it's not a reason to turn the resolution wholesale. Lesser 12 and the historical ways on humanism knows this way, and humanist politics and humanist circles so much as other values and other frontiers as well as other communities, and they have established the introduction of it. Like humanist interventions, and as I say, you can learn from the implementation of humanism and universal practice and the body, humanism alternatives, and that have the potential to be the same in worse urban planners and their government. So what's the absence of any universal nature of their having horribility, difference and holding power permanence in their soul and commonalities and certain attachment with the rest of humanism, the same as humanism will not address all the trade and interpretation of other weaker races and then by the point of rejection council and actually impressive action depending on the anthropologics and the social imagism of the positive humanism was ruled the contradiction and very possible ways that can be grasped in liberatory tests and unfortunate cycle this should not have forgotten or condemn on the intentions of the self-conscious possible and treating humanism and organized and heavily improved the middle class humans under sides in it. The conception of slavery is ontological and intellectual truth spots and denies the inherent openness of the human system where a hegemonic society over its co-option by white elites and reinvest in notions of failure. Each just proves it in terms of the Act 421 is regarding with Parliament with also security where people 21 is that soldiers of knowledge and then no purchase and inclusive completeness meaning struggle with reality is closing in struggle with reality come back for us in East Africa as inherent for more worship again that's my country in Europe and international philosophy and philosophy crisis and risk question whether philosophy is self-critical and neither of them cave in separate and separate the public more short and it's reality closing up with reality so no words in market reality is this outcome goal the company by the parents of the whole human in this abstract context brings the problems of identity on formal constraints and then companies from signing and information reflection over reflection and the framework of Alice Spencer to produce and have strengths and lines and make production and deliberate them out of proportionate contradiction takes from treating this one's trade by God's offer closure and the whole secularized our argument the Odyssey rationalizations and just by God's circumstances replacing God with something other way the same role this one and that question becomes a full solid this one self and treat this one that's complete and perfect by making people a problem that become a little bit of inside itself and how can help and also way it never works by self-nourishing or sexual evolution and more they kind of combinations of ability to control in that direction in terms of contextualize another process is all apologizing the radicalization without idea outside that mirrors race up to this with the national word and like beyond what this one reality racism is wrong principle commitment but for reality going out for possession of evolution machine that requires the way to take a public for actions of that action to human reality produce a public through which it manifest politics and a politics use military influence also every threats outline leadership sustain military overmatch but define bold rivals and economies calculating averages the escalate rate 18 second American representative running country bankruptcy republic and your base station no so the Washington on that down and second house to harm back when everybody else and multiple global norms but priorities and superior to sure all values and their premise you allies will lose credibility necessity appreciations and then enrollment drops and building natural crisis and trust and the China has global norms and another aggression of navigation time heard of proportions of the work of the government of Korea and parcel run rates and equal threshold in the proxy forces across the world in some state of the same motor keyboard separate means and use forces but the ultra community keyboard against the side of that has and that's actually ways in the Russian American Russian trying to multiply the comments states angry current combination of race of it author the world's more peaceful than ever heterotic class guarantees nuclear annihilation part of 11 we live in a global world with about the mass knowledge of the US around globalization, the authorities, and the British world to reach the world, America, American, America, globalization, Marxism, human rights, global life expectancy, increased GDP, environment, production, about less from the complex, culture, 99% of all the war in the United States has been the largest cause of the decline of empire internationally. Any other rating in terms of singular actions, not structural system effects, to be 1915, Empire finished, and then the world by large number of sovereign states and views several elements in terms of the overall the SS had on the system of world and the system, the SS on my empire. All the SS that imperial base episodes are more overshadowed in their overall American and imperial center has centrality make all view ways this Europe and against the interests of all places and as the old west of European imperialism against the Indians and imperialism of the West America, the US playing a harder role already in American harmony of the place and how so we argue America's most the final organization of the global system and before utilitarianism it's all coherent world theory of very 18 and some national rest of important others so the American all future generations have showing lives in Indian underestimate mineral single probably has managed their social right. Also trying about 29 hours and now to the end of the table person's life another while that's right. The reviews and the well position now human lives are equally possible to get and which in each consider social society and which remember they have to see although everybody equally so have very high value for producing GCR. Okay. I'm good.
Alright. Okay. You're open, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So shall I? You say that our impact framing is dependent on liberal values. I guess what's the link to this argument?
So for example, whenever you make arguments about
Hold
how
up. Gotta mute.
good. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, for
let's
example,
restart cross.
oh,
One of the judges didn't hear.
Oh, okay. Oops.
Sorry about that. Hold on. All right.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I see.
Okay. So once again, you say that our impact framing depends on liberal values. What's the link to this argument?
So, for example, anytime we call to say that a certain group is excluded and they should not be, that is a call to equality. That is a call to say that a troop is being treated disparately and they should not be. Those are liberal values that rely on the ideas that all humans are equal and that we should treat them as such. Even if you have complaints with humanism, they're not like with how humanism is applied. It's not intrinsic to humanism.
No, you shouldn't treat humans equally.
We say we should. You reject the resolution as for its pseudo-humanism. We think that if we are rejecting the resolution for humanism, that is a bad idea. Humanism can be redeemed. It's not an intrinsic bad. It can be used for bad ends. But
we could do that thing. And now on frame subtraction,
right.
How is the affirmative, or I guess disregard frame subtraction, how does affirmative win this round?
I mean, we think that if you win, that your model of debate is desirable. Then I guess if we go for a topicality argument, if you win that your model of debate is better than ours, then you win. If we do not, then if you win the F is better than the status quo or competing counter advocacy, then you win.
Should metaphors not exist in debate?
I mean, we don't think that this isn't the metaphors K, it's the market metaphors K. Like we don't have beef with like the entire category of all metaphors. We think that bringing the economy and saying and kind of analogizing debate and other similar social outlets to the market,
How is like debate not a market/business itself?
No, this is not like a descriptive thing. Even if you are right that it's a market, Zuthoff says it is bad to call it a market. It re-entrenches capital ideology. It means that we see everything as a market. How does it re-entrench
capitalism, I guess?
Well, right, so Zuthoff says that calling things markets, just when they are not actually technically a market, or even if they are, like if they're anything beyond the literal market, as in the economy,
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, like we can have the debate of like debate is not literally a market. And Zuthoff says that when you analogize things to markets when they are not, it re-entrenches capital domination. It means that you see everything as a market, which means that capitalism is going to overdetermine it because capitalism overdetermines the power of markets.
So when we see a market and we identify as a market, that is a capitalism.
We're just going to go like, no, you are wrong. Debate is not a market. Like we're going to like fundamentally disagree. I don't know what the warrant for debate. Like you have said, debate is a market.
Like I said, don't have that debate. Don't worry about it.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. Now, on presumption, do we have to win some spillover claim in order to solve?
I mean, like, you have to win that the app creates positive effects. Like,
okay,
if the app does not do that, then you should lose on presumption.
So we have to win that the app is a good idea.
Yes. I mean, better than the status quo or competitive counter advocacy or your model is better for the first question.
For sure. And now, can you explain this Gordon 21 card to me? Never mind.
Starting prep now. I'm just ready to do some stuff. No, almost done. Just hamstring flexion bearings and ball and bearings.
I can't do that.
Okay, I can do it. Yeah, the last one.
Oh, I'll send out the market metaphors card that I read. It wasn't that often. Should be sent.
Right, stop prep 6:07. Send it out. The 2AC should be sent. The order is going to be the case page, the market metaphors, okay, and then, actually, no, sorry, the case page, frame subtraction, market metaphors, and then framework. Is everyone good? All right. Who are the people? Democracy and Western thought from Aristotle to Christianity distinguishes with the bourgeoisie as the embodiment of the people. The utilitarian ethic of the people incentivizes the state to stockpile limited resources and command distribution to preserve and extend its function into the conscious and morality. The subject that 22 opposite transition. Wars are now the both as the world is collapsing with multiple kinds to the capitalism. We have to have resistance that goes against the normative modes of imperial warfare. The U.S. maintains its global power projection through systems of capital, justify genocide, wars of interventionism, and logistics meant to expand the global nature of capital against non-Western conquering nations. U.S. backing the pro-capitalist group in Indonesia justify the kills of 500,000 communists in the name of preventing the domino effect. This means American democracy institutionalizes colonial conditions of slavery and imperialism through economic reductionism. The law becomes a gift of freedom that requires compensation of genders, the liberal social contract as racial debt. Oh, therefore, the 1AC affirms anarcho-abolition as non-organizing analytic for thinking black life abolition, politics, and radical democracy against and in excess of the state as a horizon of social movement. The AF changes where, who, and how, value, and action as a defense of militant black life extend. Folks and debate function as a hegemonic force system that denies an equal playing field for those who do not fit to the definitions of lies. We are cast on the outskirts and told that capital we bring to the table is not viable because it's too radical. This is how black debate becomes otherized. The impact is racial dysphoria as black and brown debaters are forced to reconcile with the false notions of fairness as unfair to black debaters. It's them into the psyche of the black and brown debaters. It's a damn suffer. Tackles to be freed now line by line. They say the Burke evidence bottom of approaches to antitrust are better to build social relations because people, not all poor people, have access to the minutia of antitrust law, but there can be bottom-up approaches that, like Asada's orders, that aim to shut down different organizations and organize from Lincoln, one, care for another, and two, scale up to have the people power and the dual power to undo those relations, which is net better than the Burke evidence. They say Lester Act isn't a blatant rejection of humanism, but rather and embracement and a looking towards of a new world, i.e. the affirmatives and anarcho-abolition debate evidence seeks to go beyond what can be conceived as human arguments that black bodies are not on an equal playing field as of right now, which is the inherent problem in the status quo. But it doesn't mean that we absolutely shut off the idea. We're not saying that there's no ontological capacity for the blacks. It also takes out the Gordon evidence. Also, consequentially, there's no link here because the affirmative sociality, no static notion of blackness is in the affirmative. The Sakara evidence also doesn't matter, but we'll turn it because we're saying that there is that the Sakara evidence is a scientific explanation for the libidinal economy, i.e. there are still black people who get killed, and the more supposed to question is how we militate in the face of that. On the military arguments, first I'm going to read their Brand's evidence, say empire build, reject them. That's Fullerton and Yellow, their Brand's evidence. The United States consistently accounted for around 35 to 45% of world defense spending and maintained pluralist global power projection against privileges. Washington would need the military power necessary to overdirect the global alliance commitments. Washington could enjoy primacy and its global political fruits on the cheap. And they say the world people than ever. I can bury no. Our inheritance just proves that the ways that things like COVID and the war happening in Russia and Ukraine prove that the world is not more peaceful than ever, and that there are still minorities that are dying in the status quo, which means plus their evidence is outdated, so it shouldn't be used as a uniqueness claim. They say accurate evidence, still partaking in racial capitalism and sanctions that starve people is the impact listed above. World is in crisis and we post-state. And they say the utilitarianism argument, but we have an answer here. They say for util, but Robinson 16 explains that when it says that util ignores the poor, not the slave, which means that black people are always excluded from utilitarian calculus, and also util will also never take into account indigenous population if the best for the most amount of people, which means we can fuck over black indigenous people as long as everyone else, black people and their partners are good. Sorry, lost my job. Frame subtraction. Our interpret the next shift for joining the after advocating the status quo or competing method. Picks are bad to be rejected. Frame distraction supercharges every standard. One, intellectual laziness. Picks are heterodoxy retweet with the comment on the one EC. They owe be any benefit of debate by minimizing sex to class. Second, time and stress. Use takes 2 seconds to make a new pick, and they pick out the ballot, which is literally impossible to do because there has to be a ballot in space. So see, reading the same arguments as well as linked to the case solves our offense and also solves topical education. Frame distraction is generally bad. Their interpretation favors the negative, makes the 1 year impossible, avoids class level by allowing new picks at any point. Protect the argument and the team. Black scenario planning and imagination is an impact to the pick or affirmative gestures towards allowing black people to imagine after future of anarcho abolition of ballot. Things to before value that's not connected to capitalist economies of production, which is inherently good. There's only a risk that the act can change and import a different type of relationality towards the ballot. The picks a double turn, but it's voting negative means giving the ballot, which means there's some value in voting for Kentucky, but none for voting for Fullerton. This is a parasitic way of whiteness trying to strip blackness of all value of black medical scholarship and debate the impact is confident dissonance reading on the K and the ballot case of perfect on its own and not true. They can't say the ballot has inherently no value and then advocate for having forms of value and social justice. That's not going to work. Market metaphors, impact turning it, they're good. Metaphors are often used in black and indigenous storytelling as a way to explain the way the world works. Debate is not like a market, but rather it has many components of one. Judges aren't here for free. There's a market that exists on Facebook and other places where judges seek payment for their services. Schools pay to be here in the first place. Gentrification is a double term with the market metaphors. Creep the cart they added on about marketplace ideas literally is a double term in Perfcom because they equate ideas to the marketplace. They first cards about how conceptualizing everything as a market is that. We agree, which is why we don't say everything is a market, but rather debate functions in ways like a market. There is a history of regulating what should be said in debate. That is true. You don't have impact. The impact already say metaphors once, which should make this debate done. They don't have internally between us saying ideas are regulated debate and the literal extinction of the human race. Don't do the work for them. The third card is the alternative affirmative. This evidence is literally the affirmative. We are not advocating for marketplaces to exist, which is what their evidence is gesturing at. Don't buy the expostulation. It must come from the evidence line. Making one another metaphor does not mean that the act is inherently metaphorical. All of our impacts are literal and real, which should be a very gesture for the K firm solves because we want to reimagine value and do away with capital, which literally what the affirmative is affirming that was the K, and it just solves the critique, the T. The post affirmative arguments to our straight to the solution is traumatized by the historical trauma of racial slavery debate, which expresses a coercive neutrality of education. We make the act of topical abolishing racial contract, law or antitrust law to include soldier collective on our revolutionary demands that abolish equality law, value contradiction, that affirmative was the federal normative and a policy that has introduced the use interest law to justice. There are these the act topical the interpretations of their offense at topic 21. Core formative ground let's see antitrust laws, effective competition standard, platform utility regulations, institutional patent licensing, the money big tech and antitrust topic will provide for the ground for their functions and position racial gaps in the and the federal government may redirect those research and host community focusation on well-being of abolitionist movements, North Dakota abolitionists, North Dakota abolitionist movements, and the aftermath of the U.S. rule against soldier law slavery, the occupation of welfare and educational deliberation by advocating arbitrary and civil 14, the knowledge that treats the corporation as data yield as a natural dimension of racial obligated collectives deployed when we see something justice not guilty, verdicts reversing judges accept that all these cultures of justification, logical sense of purity, sense of justice, anti-affirmative action decisions, white, equal protection, opportunity, non-discrimination, equality of opportunity in both cases, formal equality, renders that racial obligation total, total institutions volume, violence relevant. This is because racial justice has the limits of justice transfer through justice to the plan for action that includes the solution of discrimination. So the USFT is an assemblage of relations enforced and interpreted with class. Sparrow 15, the state other than positive number 4 for the class cutting which is electrical previous constitution created by the Democratic cutting interest in fashions, private from public part in the distinction the organizing imbalances, U.S. reformed by NGOs, non-state states, ambassadors, immigrants, refugees, portrayed as pitting independence, essentially limited boundaries from national state power policy, bribe, for an American state form, form regulation, stations of the administration, emergency fiscal policies that compose state power and anarcho-abolition includes bottom-up movements that turns fairness, not yelling LP 14 changes in that structure and antitrust. They argue top-down if you guys still the reason within the particular theory are likely fail to give due consideration to the interests of persons or theories like to have only any aforementioned analysis and respecting interests which would not be affected in the idea of this that will take bottom-up non-normative approaches to the antitrust issues are conceptually addressed from the position of the antitrust de-emphasize the normative content of antitrust the person-centered approach that identifies the requirement of the debate as essential conditions of his role, which simply states a perspective which gives a broader outlook of traditional order company variable interest so observing government justice alone can be noticed so that just addressed to a top-down program and multi-modal debate is good and critical. That's Johnson 15. The real world apparently plays without robust and most anti-constitution to the real world results to the guys that allow us to debate. It just has a instrument that will train students to debate, teach students to train especially about the state of current assumptions and actions about our realities are just that attitudes making justice across stations and debaters making arguments who let the moral bodies of market trade are not communicating with judges and judges will not go forward these arguments which are for family debaters who would not plus switch arguments less like this communication and revision mark the card at revision and Skipping the other card. Defense. 1 AC preserves good class, predictability, and iterative skills. We don't interview from the resolution. Resolution good enough limits. Second, we are unpredictable. Resolution and mechanism predicts case left on to do better. This is a Wilson the final about the topic. And third, reject the argument. And the team is more real worth and checks back on implicit bias, which is a prior issue because it's already determined that judges, coaches, students, staff come to make with different ethical reasons. And open for cross-ex.
Okay. First is like flow maintenance. What's the text of the counter interpretation?
Yeah, the text is that affirmatives must defend a critical or normative demand or policy that has the USFG use antitrust law to address racial justice.
What Fs do not meet that?
Affirmatives that do not talk about antitrust law at all, or affirmatives that don't talk about companies.
How much talking about antitrust law is enough?
We don't have to answer that.
Well, this is your interpretation. Like what does and does not meet your interpretation?
Well, if you are discussing antitrust laws and you have a critical or normative political demand to solve that harm, then it meets interpretation.
Well,
It's more of like a middle ground thing, like debaters should be able to read critical arguments, and if you don't want to do that, that's fine.
Okay, fair enough. Let's take a case. All the hedge offense, what is the alternative? Like what does the app think replaces United States unipolarity?
The thing that replaces United States unipolarity is resistance to United States unipolarity. We don't have to defend like a whole new system because that would be ridiculous in amount of a 2-hour debate, but rather that we just have to prove that U.S. military influence unipolarity is bad and violent, leads to starving people, death.
You have to win that it's net bad. You have to win that it's worse than the alternative that it would be replaced with. Like where do you have evidence that would say that? Like if hedge is like better than what would replace it? Why should
Well, our argument is that it's collapsing now. That was from the 1AC that like the United States is on the verge of collapse. Our argument is that trying to like uphold that and ignore the collapse is what just leads to more forms of violence. And we think if we do impact turn hedge, they shouldn't vote for it because it's voting for something violent in the debate space.
Wait, why is it violent in debate?
Defending American exceptionalism is violent in debate because it trains people to be neoconservatives that advocate for American
if we win that
hegemony.
hegemony is good, if we win that hegemony is good, wouldn't it be good to train people to be
If you want to go for neocons, good, I'll let you do what you do. But I'm just saying that if we win it's bad, then it's bad, Like it's an impact turn debate.
For sure. I actually want to talk about the kind of like US's collapsing stuff. The tag, like the 1AC card that mentions COVID, Ukraine, etc. It's from 2015, same year as the Dooney and Eikenberry card. How does it assume these like these collapsing events that are occurring 7 years after it was published?
Well, it's not just that card. The whole 1AC is talking about the collapse of racial democracy.
Well, you said your evidence post-dates, and it's like that's the card you're referencing. Like
Well,
maybe post-dates like
yes, the Robinson card does post-date by a year, but also like our examples post-date. Like talking about COVID post-dates, like Eikenberry talking about how people, how America, whatever.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, 10 minutes starting now.
Stop at 4:53. People in the chat. Honestly.
Yeah.
Two cards, they are sent. Okay. Also, can you go back to the Zoom?
Well, actually, I'm at 0 volume right now. Yeah.
Okay. I don't think that'd be good here, but just in case. I'm gonna wait for T and then case. Okay. Everybody good? Okay, cool. Our interpretation is that the app must defend the resolution by expanding the scope of antitrust laws because anything else makes it a predictable limit on this topic impossible. Only our interpretation preserves the role and value of debate. Debate is not good because it produces a good outcome. It is only good because it provides us with tactics for engaging information that are based on clash, rigor, and openness to the possibility of being wrong. There's no link to app offense because not a single debate commits us to a single ethical system or argument. Debate is only a forum to research and test our ideas against our well-prepared opponents. The only role for the ballot is to determine whether and who did the better debating, which makes the 1AC a secondary question to the procedural impacts of clash, because the desirability is determined by the substance of what happens within the individual debate. Our interpretation spells out the different styles, effects, and types of evidence, but every debate has two sides, and the winner is decided by the judge, which means that half must articulate a vision for how they translate competitive incentives into a model that's broadly good for a debate. Now, the 1AC messed up in Crossexamination. They refused to affirm the resolution as per the 1AC, but agree that debate and clash have intrinsic goods within and of itself because of competition and ability to determine the openness of being wrong, which means they have no offense on this flow, and only the majority of the 2C was entirely defensive. And now voting out does not change the way debate produces anti-competitive practices that they describe in the 1AC, but their interpretation Rex clash of the app is always unpredictable. The negative force generics. Now the content is controlled by the app, but the depth is up to the negative, which means good interpretations must facilitate that depth. Now the competitively disincentivizing clash causes teams to rush to the extremist visions of the world that compete with everything first. It produces dogmatisms and aversion. Their method teaches debaters that the optimal strategy is retreat from criticism, which means that we never know what we are in fact wrong about, which is a central benefit of debate because it forces us to be accountable for second and third order responses to arguments that produces better researchers, advocates, and people who have more robust and nuanced conclusions. It can explain them. Now they say they meet. They don't meet. One is that they draw an expanded scope, requires an increase in the area covered by antitrust law, which is not bottom-up approach that's described by the 1AC. They don't meet. It prefers a bottom-up approach that's not an expansion of the core antitrust laws or legislation. Second is topical. The topic proposed evidence they read does not say the 1AC would be a top left under the terms of the resolution. It just gives examples of criticism within the literature. Prefer resolution focus because it's the only predictable and stasis point of conversation for years worth of debate. Now the USFG means the one in DC dictionary government policies, and then the United States independent country government based on Washington DC is a form of legislation executive and judiciary. Now the BNF is not necessary in this debate. If the debate produces anti-competitive effects that are bad for black and brown bodies, and it should not. If we can have discussion about debate outside of debate rounds, you cannot dodge a critique if they generate links to the resolution. Then when debate, if their argument cannot generate links to the resolution, it proves that the 1AC doesn't prove the resolution is bad because it doesn't have anything to do with it, which means switching sides under wouldn't be bad. They could read on the argument at top. Bottom up approaches for antitrust wouldn't be good on the negative. Now competition is good. There's a reason why we try to win tournaments, reward a winning criticism incentive to make better arguments, comparisons, and read more books, engage with new literature and ideas. We all dedicate time to research because we have the chance to win, but their interpretation that apps must defend critical normative normative and policy options it has to use to achieve racial justice is entirely infinite in scope and it's not predictable. If you think back to C Crossexamination when they couldn't define at what point and then the discussion about such areas necessary. That means that discourages this sort of research because it's not predictable. Two, it causes burnout, which means that students will lead the activity in terms of the burnout they experience within the day because the topic becomes so large under their interpretation. Which makes people quit debate. Competition doesn't trade off productive conversation. The winner loses a reflection of who debated better, not what the absolute truth is. Debate teaches what arguments are accountable and which ones work and whose are ability to have non-competitive conversation outside debate. Now, the only our interpretation solves clash outside one or so far because we're guaranteed links to government action and top bounty checks at proliferation. Resolutional questions stop awareness from formally fiating a solvency by simply claiming to. Their interpretation wrecks clash tacitly and subsequently it takes the teeth out of negation. Subsequently, smart teams make the smallest claim for generics and negligence is counterproductive, specifically solvency prices, and agreed upon competition standards. Tactically, they incentivize as many new modular assets as possible to work, even the best negative preparation. Their model makes the neg win a comparatively accurate characterization of the 1AC, i.e., antitrust top-down approach is good to the debate, and there isn't time to do both before the 1AC, which is why next disproportionately leads to no link from 2 ARs. Their model trains traders out the optimal strategy to retreat from criticism. Now they say our interpretation is arbitrary. No, it's at least arbitrary. It's based on the resolution, which is the only 64 a contestation for years worth of the debate. They say exclusion argument. One is that they link the exclusion to with the back to 2C Crossexamination when they said a broad line of which apps are topical under their interpretation. They said certain apps are not, which means that their interpretation also excludes inevitability. But topicality is not an attempt to exclude, but rather it's not an attempt to exclude, but rather it is an attempt to refine. If our model of debate is better, then we should win this debate. But it's inevitable the line will be drawn everywhere the counter says is limited. The relevant question is those exclusions are justified by creating bigger benefits. If we win our interpretation best and maximize the class, then we should win the debate. Second is no link. Topical debate is a floor, not a sin that can take many forms to be supported by many justifications. This all begs the question for the topic of education and case arguments that we'll make later. They say multi-model debate is good. The impact to this argument of the card is advocacy, which our interpretation is better for it. Is only maximized in a world where the resolution is enacted because of predictability that was explained above. But their multi-model debate is not predictable because it can take many forms which are infinite. They say they want to see first perseverance good clash. No, we can read topic this because they refuse the resolution. It's literally the last card. They say it's not unpredictable. Yes, it is because we refuse the resolution. That was above also anarcho abolition. It's just one of the many forms of grassroots movements, which is not which means which explodes the literature. Now, fairness and clash are not thresholds across it. They are things that should be maximized. So don't settle for half measures. Any example of this debate does not prove that social model debate lets one side decide the subject matter instead of a shallow debate by minimizing points of clash to facilitate easy victory. Think in terms of a large sample of years of debates and incentivized based by an app team over the long term. That team will work to minimize the number of viable arguments against it because it maximizes their ability to win, which is why restriction on content has to come outside of the app team. Now, here's the top core version of the app. The United States Party of the anti-competitive strengthening of global racial alliance by racial alliances. That's a less attack. One of the 1AC cards is it allows them to engage in resolution action by the time their discussion of the 1AC2 plan text, which allows the next to have sufficiently confident and decide on the ground the case page. But negative presumption that 1AC has no causal mechanism to resolve fascism or U.S. hegemony has failed to explain how this one instance of debate spills outside of the round. The 1AC prevents coalition building, and they consider that antitrust is uniquely mobilizing, building collaborative relationships, to restructure market-dominant institutions to achieve anti-racist and third, to engage with fairly to change us. The birth evidence corporate exploitation of black and brown bodies is contingent upon antitrust policies that can be reversed through institutional engagement. But Houston, 20 laws for anti-corporate people, corporations, exploiting control of black and brown and working thanks to conservative reinterpretation of interest law policies and practice insurance abuse and impact on people to how their interest from the perpetuation of hierarchy chronic and conservative taking over the judiciary justice interests and officials and focus on the consumer welfare loosen restriction of corporate behavior with what does that practice in their pit Republican refers to reconstruction interest control the size of corporation program works to go power surveillance and board of against corporate in advance and freedom of people of color. Now they say debate denies an equal playing field for black and brown bodies because black debate becomes otherwise. They have not given an example of how this occurs within the debate space, and there's no reason why the debate is a unique function. The right debate uniquely does those things, but they. I'll read this first. It should be tied. Policy should be tied to top-down approaches. The Lee and Chin, trying to harsh not limit opportunity to address rape, racial equity, harms the company, contrary to aggressive effective municipalities, consequences of isolation, not to be contracts, negatively impact market. In other words, the college post-employment representation, increase commonality power, nurses affect the diversity and entrepreneurs, racial equity should be position core president, church should be sensitized and role institutional inequities, contrary to markets, interests, and strong dominance and companies in powerful position, historical work, showing qualities of search engine, which controls over more than do generate advertise for the rest of policies and results in emotional harm for racially stereotyped individual and fight profile lack of competition, reduce markets and large companies collect cash values of data.
I'm good for cross.
Yeah. So why should we just rely on top-down approaches to access?
There's a couple reasons. I read two cards. First is the Bayesian card. It says that the way that the institutions work to exploit black and brown bodies is through sort of the law. The law maintains.
So can I stop you right there? Real quick?
Yeah.
All right. Is there any other way we can, like stop corporate exploitation of black and brown people?
I'm sure there is, but I think we have posited the argument that a top-down approach is the best approach to resolving those issues.
And can you give me a warrant from the Lee and Chin 21 card?
Let's see. The American public can reverse, reconstruct the interest, but control the size and discretion of corporation, permit workers and independent firms to build power, serve as an important weapon against corporate hegemony, and advance the freedom of people.
So it's talking about like workers building power, right?
Sure. Yes.
What does that look like?
It means that they have more power over, like I say, like their wages. They'll allow.
I guess my question is, does that look like a union? Does that look like?
I mean, it can take many forms. The Bayesian evidence doesn't describe exactly that it would be a union.
Okay. Now, so once again, y'all said that you could vote negative on presumption because there's no spillover claim in this round. I asked you or your partner earlier about how we win. You said all we have to do is prove that AFA is a good idea. So once again, why do we have to win a
In order to
spillover
prove
claim?
it's a good idea, you have to prove that you actually do something to change something.
Because plan text like change policy, right? Because once judges
Well,
go
if
on,
you have a way to solve something that is good, solve a good idea.
okay, yeah, that's fine.
But what was the TVA text?
The United States federal government should prohibit the anti-competitive strengthening of global racial alliances.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that real quick?
The United States federal government should prohibit the anti-competitive strengthening of global racial alliances. I could send it in the email text if you would like.
Oh, please, I would love that. I guess my next question is,
Sent it out over.
oh, there you go. So once again, how do we link, or how's our model debate link to this exclusion argument you're making?
How does your interpretation cause exclude like link to the exclusion argument?
Yeah.
The argument is that your counter interpretation sets a broad line for what asks are topical and what asks aren't topical. And 2C cross-ex, Austin asked what the asks will be not topical under your interpretation. You all gave a list of examples that sets a broad line for what is topical, which is exclusionary.
One R is sent. Order. Here, sorry. Let me unmute just a second. So, have you been listening?
Oh, I didn't unmute.
You can say anything more?
Rip.
Again, I'm sorry, I didn't unmute.
No, you're fine. I can hear you, but can you both mute? I know White, you were unmuted the whole time.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Okay,
Everybody
awesome.
mute for the one and R except.
Okay, the 1R should be sent. The order is frame subtraction, the K, and case.
Frame subtraction K case.
Nice.
Okay, is everyone good? Viva,
Not going for, but picture go one that encourages us to research and enforce the ethic of key possession. The alternative is more intellectual laziness because it forces a run reactionary generic, which is kind of all over offense on T, which cross apply. Number two, not flex and key to test the app over a variety of angles and a variety of positions, especially when they don't advocate for the resolutional mechanism. They still get perm speak first and last, which means next flex category that ways because the app has structural advantages that only the block and the block and the conditional advocacies and other specific forms of arguments to be able to overcome through bright line all counterpoints and critiques or picks out of something. And then when I see you forward the argument at the team, it's not a reason why our interpretation is bad. It's not an affluent condition. It's not a reason why the app is going to display the critique. Not going forward doesn't mean the change is bad. It's not a reason. It's not an affluent condition. Not a reason why the app is better than this quo. Okay, so use the Germany solution against a dangerous world of hostile situation, welfare, problem, task competition that culminates in great power nuclear war, costs attacks Americana. Ensures we'll be living in borrowed time. It's one of the brands in Barnett. It outweighs extinction. The qualitatively different impact that you convert to its irreversibility. To you, that was it. I'll do it more than the bottom. Nuclear cause extinction outweighs other essential risks. In PD16, even if the other knowledge will say, don't have all that. Just will family decades of mass construction needed solid for reducing the effects of racism again. Ultra reducing racism is never different than construction that would have found it all humans and other species of trying to solve it over technology on it. Oh, civilization coming up and nuclear weapons use other ends seems to rival to me. See the even countries on it. It outweighs repeating the hedge cause violence is not a substitute for spectacular system. Violence matters more and more conceptually distinct from our quality. Polarizing in the study of abortion be some to the kind of violence of one how it's not based on more to the study of abortion security was more category. They're also distinct. It really topics requiring reforms of theorization inquiry. What I think is work from other balances and other issues back our focus on balance and also those essential in the chapter of there. A balance of war, sustainability, their sustainability arguments are just assertions. Crises are not evidence of existential crises of the United States. Yes, government is resilient as proven by its existence for 2.5 centuries. They functionally fiat the replication of U.S. hegemony, which we conceded to have sustainable brands. 18 organizations civil powers here, and they charter for actors and more definitely passes from the true benefits spending was GDP is snapshot of and foreign corporations and the bank was of all the U.S. and the U.S. was for private hands, both your own military to see more system nuclear comparison. Massive advantages in aircraft carriers and generation aircraft and nuclear submarines, aerial vehicles and armament, even capital flexible structures. Although we know it doesn't turn out much of a fuel like a kind of we'll something. There also is certainly things. I don't have card for Ukraine or COVID, but anyways, Omicron's already fading at a little impact now. With you one, okay, they're following they're enough taking the movement apart from setting assuming setting into engagement and they paid away much better activity. I'll look for GQ hours engagement card rebuttals were made. Okay, query something that should recover as Omicron subsides. Ukraine will stay contained. How much 22? It's unlikely, however, more worth we mentioned about saying they could make the Durham and the person named that we take seriously second and some how much more than also US and troops and elected chance and invade further than don't panic and that fighting also Ukraine people made resistance and that's war is going to turn into a war or although it's argument it makes no sense with Trinity Crossexamination if we win the hedge is good, isn't how to say so and advocate for because truth is a bit of slander, even if the one in epistemology side of the absence of war among great powers means making relative, not absolute claims when he hedge better or requires them to with nothing alternative. Well, 412, using clarity best people ever been period and it's not by the animal company means absence of war among the great powers vis-a-vis back war system common researchers or the post 1990 last was by that but about war that Germany wasted measure war violence measures we are among the most people period there's no lost all time in all of you history material use a very complicated way to say or like Afghanistan and back yes and end up anti-Iranian counter-insurgency operations in no way contract with the party says unprecedented peaceful military interventions or minute about that hit about polarity at least and no possibility of learning as back polarity about what complex in Korea Vietnam America Washington other military intervention, none of it is maybe ever policy wars in American drama, mind team interventions, impulses. The only two easy answer is that violence still exists. Obviously, violence still exists, but this isn't. This is a question of linear amounts of violence. Even if violence still exists, it's a question of whether or not hegemony is better, is net better than other alternatives for reducing it, which only we have heard evidence on. Hegemony stops war, cause bandwagoning in terms of deep web of alliances that serve those for liberal interests and encourages challengers. That's brands. It turns case constitutional clarity. It causes extinction via transition wars. The structure of the industrial system explains conflict. Like 18, hegemonic rivalry. This was like after war. Party that was a lot of war so carbon have the weapons so by powering the parts of war saying commonly and pressure other break of New again World War III next short natural possibilities in the sense that yes and then I had a stuff is rival the world and more peaceful than ever the wars of it as appears on wars of common and everything how many sure so dribble the human something comprehensible so and of course on the trend behind instead of been in by geopolitics and sociology in the face of the US and military by entries inside of work within the American order 2,000 years of empirical evidence proves well from the imperial science application is the kind of not going to power having a new battle systems in empirical literature the only structure of how properties in the party that's years and that's how the systems they have poverty in poverty theory etc Over between the terms of 1994 was uniform warfare for an arms and quarter when attempts people to win and return and the imperialism argument return their vague assertions. Germany is the biggest internal to decline of imperial practice globally. Only our evidence uses system level studies conducted over multiple decades, even if other anecdotal instances of the U.S. being imperialist. And again, this is about net, not on the net, not yes, not yes, no. The U.S. military presence is not coercive and of course we're good. Always welcome. Actually, I'll skip it. That court and the 4 ways in part building and its elements are intrinsically U.S. driven. We have a charter duty. I can continue. U.S. is the first imperial power against the corporations and power building and I can also see the ways in which the U.S. and imperial one of the roles in the U.S. We're independent of other colonies and with the Russian help stand independence against European efforts. U.S. not establishment of power between U.S. and all the European colonization on the record of within Paris, also in Germany, European, Italy played decisive roles in the ordinance of the U.S. as well as communist and revolutions and then modern anarchy and facilitating body states survive and member society and support for national law means returning war aggressions, parallels remaining colonial movements against press off the world party infrastructure over global economics and enabling forces to no other sovereign system alliance and moving through the implementing of complex protecting the system for the return of balance complex and empire building you chose the only clear ethical philosophy all humans lives have initial value, which means the only imperative is to maximize the number of lives preserved. New war kills the 8 billion on the planet now and hundreds of trillions of future generations bomb and bear. The only answer is an assertion that black people are considered within utilitarianism. It's flat wrong. All lives are weighed equally, including black ones. The alternative is weighing certain lives more than others, which is allowing them to decide. The question is not are there bad aspects to hegemony. The only question is what is hegemony better than the alternative? Then not defining alternative means you should heavily err an absence of U.S. hegemony. It's not an absence of hegemony at all. It looks like a revisionist and authoritarian hegemony. It looks like rogue states that escalate, all of which are conceded impact claims that have a 100% risk of escalation, and they have no alternative to the ethical theory of utilitarianism, which means it's try or die next.
Starting now.
I think people are more tired physically in person, but I think that needs to be sleep better. So it's virtual, you get like a mental reaction, but you don't have physical energy. So if they can be more tired physically, I think it's less tired. So you ask now?
Justin first. I'm a JCCC.
No, I knew that. Why did I transpose you? No, I know, but like, I know you. I had that. I'm sorry, brain fart. That's the physical exhaustion. Walking out. You still mess my head. How y'all doing?
One thing now, that's pretty exactly what I would have predicted if I were to use it.
Okay.
Michigan State people can probably do it.
Anyway,
Yeah, it's a little bad for sure. You know, you're kind of like pretty much bottom of the first third. All the team partners and more stuff. Yeah, Minnesota's. I was so bad. It's easy one time to start 0-4.
Judging in person now, you're online, it must be like
It's gotta be hard, but it's also not good for not that.
oh yeah, no. Compared to here, people are making references to things in person, you're just there, just like trying to do one. Someone's gotta be awful. Someone's gotta be awful. I'm like, I'm like in person. No, like online, we can make deliberate efforts for audio.
Yeah, that's true. I'm
I really can't wish it, but for the resurgence in September, October, and what it's memorizing. We gotta go physically. The term is physically there. That was not at all. major role in developing the knowledge, right? Online knowledge.
The target is really important in the thing is that it's taking them. Students have a challenge around this.
Last year, I think that we got clinically seen last year. We really everyone who was on the field beforehand, except for one, basically. If you had in person.
Right, stop up at 2:30.
And then we just had just kids 2 weeks ago to one complication. They went there in person. We Sam's an old.
There are cards and I'm saying.
Anyways, we go there, we got like kids afterwards. Debate, it's fun. That was just great. Yeah.
And then they're leading up in Western Washington, just for that reason.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling they come back and they go one
If
time.
you get some long term, they will talk about it. Sorry, what was the order?
The order is the case page, presumption verse, and then the hedged up, and then and there are 2 cards that are just.
Case, presumption hedge, and then.
Just let me let me know when everyone's good.
I still make it though.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You 2 are good? Alright. Vote after you affirm an abolition as not bringing a link for thinking black life, abolition, politics, and radical democracy. It solves black imagination, goes conceded, invokes, and debate much hegemonic force system where we have to, or to dive an equal playing field, cast around the outskirts, see impact ritual dysphoria as black and brown debaters forced to reconcile with false notions of fairness, but also concede the imagination portion that we should be able to imagine different forms of black anarcho abolition where we have new systems that deny the possibility of conflict to exist, which is not better framing for allowing for psychic health that exists within debate. They think presumption educational value is good. Consider we change the way change the way we have an organizing analytic or the way we go about organizing, which is not good. Also going to see a black imagination go, which is not reason to vote for the affirmative, i.e. black people should be able to imagine different worlds for themselves, which is what the affirmative does, imagine a world free from the transition wars and the violence that's happening in the status quo. No contestation on if that imagination can happen or not, which means that they are going to be behind on the solvency of the case policies. They say policy should be top down only. No warrant can see if this dooms everyone who can't get to the top who happens to be black and brown, which means that we are ahead on a question on the hedge debate hedge and great transition war because the U.S. already has to engage in low-grade counterinsurgency. This is true of the U.S. regime change wars that only result in 3 of the 18 being successful, which not only proves it's unsustainable, but proves that the U.S. and Germany is always going to stay at war, which means they don't get the transition war on the offense. This is a debate, not the world at large in international relations. What matters is that epistemology become their arguments. If we want to risk that hedge is violent to people in the global south, then you should vote for the affirmative because it means they can see a value framing to first. Neutral doesn't matter because the U.S. has not made actions in the best interest of the global south. Otherwise, they would be truly utilitarian, but they're not. They can see things in these examples I said from the 2AC that they're literally killing. The U.S. has killed 500,000 communists in the U.S. group that hedge is not going through this war, and that people are dying of the state of the United States military. They can't justify it, and the killings, which is why they can see them just pull all the examples, the examples that I was telling you of the case page and the 1AC, apply them here. Or like we can make new examples because they read a literal card dumps that the killing of Gaddafi proves the invasion of other non-capitalist nations of the U.S. Germany has justified, and also U.S. presence is bad. bad and coercive. Every nation the U.S. has troops in is there because of U.S. colonized, so they would have been there so long that they have forced the people of Guam, Japan, South Korea that their presence is good, which means that there is a forced idea here that hegemony has to be good because the U.S. is the only other option. Argument is that the affirmative is a better option. Conceding black imagination good means that we can imagine a more free of hegemony, free of violence that is purely peaceful, and we get this. Also, their evidence is that liberal nationalism system that stops empire, not unipolarity, which is what their brands of evidence advocates for. VL, like refugees. There was no global anarchism system that usually European exploitation of subsequent imperial and colonial ventures that the district systems of political characterized by leadership systems were anarchic, marked by high levels of military action. It was empires that dominated European successful building on global scope, like because the imbalance of power cards of Europeans against from the European states were commonly warring against the one of the dominance in Europe, the balance of power card and the Westphalian system of Europe, which is the volatile power of Europe and the world independent imperial expansion and cap collapsing. Now most recent evidence that's 1921. The face of events has accelerated the crisis of world capitalism is spreading. There's the same picture of chaos, economic dislocation, and class polarization. Protests in India, Colombia, Chile, Belarus, and Russia demonstrate the same process of massive resistance, swearing on the ruling classes like the government in old ways. And capitalism cannot solve the problem, and it's the problem itself. The 25 billion jobs are lost worldwide. The crisis is plunging millions of people wherever the poverty is one million percent the same to be practically clear. Goal of economic cloud crisis will also recreate this as a feeling poverty, food insecurity, about product insecurity. This proves that it's not sustainable because it's happening under the frame of hegemony. And Shevsky 15 says that in order for hedge to be sustainable, there needs to be a threat for people to rally against. U.S. hedge also says that it has not been around for 200 years, and empires only last around 250, so it's time for the U.S. to collapse, proven by Rome, which is why Biden is practicing restraint because the shit is about to collapse. And favorite. Gonna start on the basis of this word. It said that I made on the top of the on top of the case page because it turns all their arguments. Framework is unique because compared to others arguments because it attempts to deny the existence of black scholarship in this space. They concede it. So store on the floor. Racial dysphoria means that black debaters become depressed, anxious, and do not want to engage in the activity. They're not having fun of the activity because white debaters are always telling them what they can and can't read in this space, which is a net harm to their model. This is a debate about models, and our model is that better. The conversation is better. We should have a critical or political top-down or bottom-up approaches, which solves all their offense, but they don't solve ours. The TVA doesn't make the interpretation at all, nor does it talk about specific antitrust policy or law. It doesn't have a real mechanism, and alliances are more than business practices, so our interpretation is better than the TVA, but also it doesn't have a card as long as the so this is literally not a thing. They're just making it up to win the debate, but our argument is that the risk dysphoria outweighs this on scope because it means that we can't have forms of engagement when black voters are literally depressed and literally depressed in forms of debate because they're not being able to read what they want or have a genuine scholarship and a connection to that scholarship. They say resolution focused, but have the only outline they can see the warmth that top down and bottom up is better because it allows us people who cannot reach the top to after they say competition good, not offense. We agree it's good, but you shouldn't be discrediting the scholarship of the 1HC by saying that we shouldn't have it in this first place too. They say class, or our critical solves class better because we can have debates about if a critical team is a critical after read a policy answer or a critical answer which checks offense. If a policy team is a policy after read a critical answer or policy answer which checks offense, it proves that the debate is better under our model, and that's the only impact that they have. Multi-model debate is critical and good. It's been since the political project and the rise of many K-teams, Elijah and Ryan, uniting the crowns, Yvonne, Nick, uniting the crowns, and also all the K-teams now that are advocates of abolition also can see public paper. It means that there is a stable form of ground, i.e. you should read the public paper if you want to see what things are reading. The abolition teams have been debating all year long. There's no excuses. Only we have an external impact that outweighs all of their stuff. They don't get any of the class arguments, which their only impact here because we have won that our class is better and our model is more critical because we go off the public paper and allow for forms of abolition that relate to antitrust law while not skirting the resolution, unlike their TVA, which completely goes beyond the resolution, while the counter-interpretation doesn't.
Yeah. 453. 453.
Are you a Tom Brady Patriots fan, a post Tom Brady Patriots fan, or both?
Post Tom Brady Patriots fan,
Oh,
but I
really?
watch Tom Brady as well. Tom Brady's a very good football player.
Right on, right on. I was at the Patriots Chiefs game. Overtime, when Brady won the field, and what kind of scored.
Really.
That's
Maybe not for you, yeah.
Great game,
But
four innings.
fans like you. Great ending for a person like me or fellow Boston here. Boston. Are you? Yes. Okay. The order is case, NDT, case. I'm doing the hedge stuff first. And so
Case, hedge, starting with hedge, NDT.
yeah. Okay. Anybody not good? Cool. Retreat of U.S. hegemony guarantees nightmare scenarios and the dangers were fulfilled with hotspot escalation, wildfire proliferation, and global competition that all cascades in a human institute. A nuclear war with every major power that's brains and barred. A nuclear war outweighs the conceded. Then it makes the entire world uninhabitable. Global famine in the last decade, self-assured of destruction, and ultraviolet radiation scopes the entire world, killing off every species. That's the initial strength. That's PNT. It's a conceded impact, which means it's 100% risk that I'll kill everybody off this planet. This debate is not. This debate is not about it's hedge violence, but it's hedge better alternatives to reducing violence than the affirmative. If we win, that hedge stops the extinction of human life as we know it. Then we should win the debate. Now the 1 year is really hedging on that on sustainability and transition work, which they have zero evidence on. Now there's a couple of pieces of evidence that we have read are much better. One is that the one is relying on assertions without evidence for war and crisis. Occur not evidence of an example of the United States. The examples that they give of Ukraine and COVID within their own evidence are not reasons why the U.S. supremacy is unstable. Rather, external factors that the U.S. But it also proves resiliency that the United States was able to withstand such shocks to the U.S. system. It proves that this proves resiliency. The U.S. withstood multiple existential external crises, which proves that the model is sustainable. Now the claims that primacy is faded is all overstated. Defense spending, GDP, wealth, military adventure, all interest, sustainability, leadership of the U.S. hegemony. Nobody will catch up in the near term, and the U.S. is far ahead, which means that transition wars are not on the verge of happening. That's all the brands evidence now.
The next talk about how U.S. presence is bad because it forces the idea that hegemony is good. No, we have evidence that hedge is good. There's a couple cards. One is the Beckley card, who by the way, he's a professor of political science. That tells me really qualified hedge. It says that hegemony stops war because it creates global alliance systems based on United States leadership. It causes a bandwagon effect and ensures a web of support that has conflict because companies that engage in alliances are less likely to attract each other. U.S. moderately in the leadership is key. Now they also can see the one in our Wolf of evidence, who is a professor of government at the Dartmouth College Department of Government, which is highly qualified. Then Woodford makes a claim and cites empirical studies that examines the relationship between hegemony and the likelihood of power. It concludes that competition is unlikely to cause a great power conflict in unipolar systems because unipolar systems are entirely dominant. No one wants to challenge the systems of players. And then backed by a review of empirical literature. You should read the card out of the round where card in the 5 to 1, and our evidence is much better on this question. It's based on 2,000 years of research. They say capitalism costs analysis a reason that disproves sustainability. No, it does not. You have not read a single card that says that capitalism collapsing means that the systems of U.S. hegemony will collapse. You have not read an internal link. The card between the two somehow do not allow the 2 yard to connect the dots that were not made in the 1 yard. Now they say that they saw the terminal impact of the term because of black imagination. One, this is not an argument that 2EC or 1EC. You just strike it off your flow. Neither both of those species is that black imagination is able to imagine a world free from hegemony, which solves the impact. That is a new argument rejected.
Free from all violence.
Free from all violence. Second is there's no way to prove that the app is bad if they can wish away all violence whenever. You said in Crossix, if we prove the app is worse than the status quo, we win this debate. Then you said we can imagine a world without violence. That's shifty as hell. You should reject it off the floor because they block charge. She's predicated off of 2EC mistakes and if you allow it allows for the act which is bad for debate. Third is black imagination can be good and it's good, but in this specific instance, we should evaluate the way hedge functions. Just that it's existential threats. Now, the rejection argument is not a reason to reject the theme. One truth is the defensive center. 2C continue that if we win hedge is good, then it's good to advocate for it and spread it. Any linear risk that we create more supporters of hegemony to the states that it makes voting negative ethical responsibility. Second, isn't a reason the app is better than the status quo, which they said is a roll about. Since the 1C Crossix now imperialism, they have almost no answer in the 2C and 1 to the imperialism term. The Duncan I can very care about massive empirical studies on the subject and found out that the largest cause of the fall of colonialism was U.S. leadership. Their in-depth evidence is wrong, and it concludes that U.S. leadership is not the reason for the empires proved by the collapse of colonial empires in the wake of World War II. When the U.S. established itself as the great power, the alternative to U.S. empire isn't less empire. It's actually more interspersed with the violent transition wars, use it or lose it, escalatory pressures, revisionist adventurism, which always in terms of the case. Now, utilitarianism is the only coherent moral philosophy. Always all lives exactly equally, and its moral calculations are completely external class, race, and any other identity categories. The ultimate egalitarian form of ethics, and the alternative is an overemphasis of certain lives over others, which is the logic of slavery, genocide, and exploitation. When they can't go for util, they concede that extinction is true and 100% probability. They say. It completely external classification. It's alternate egalitarian form of ethics, and alternative is the over certain loves others. Now, for me, if they win that utility is imperfect, they have no counter model for how you should evaluate ethical decision making, which means utilitarianism is the only choice. The U.S. may not be a perfect utilitarian, but it does not matter if the ethics of hegemony are net positive. All their examples do not matter when compared to the system's level analysis. Of course, there are limited examples where a hedge has been bad at like presence, but we've read multiple empirical studies that all conclude that the world has never been more peaceful than under U.S. under unipolarity proven by the 1C Barnett evidence that says that the mortality rates are at its lowest point in the life expectancy is at the highest, which proves that the world is getting better. Now the plan, now topic howdy. Now I'm not going to go further. It's not an attempt to excluding cause black liberties from anxious. And you can see that as topic of the base floor, not a ceiling and exclusion. There's another interpretation. Now the case page, the plan does not solve. Bottom up approaches ignore institutional change. That is the reason for why black and brown exploitation occurs incessantly.
2:30.
There's math typos, but this is what I have for hedge. Figure it out. Oh, you can start on. Start here. And then you just stream out this and then go here.
Alright. So,
1 second, I don't think I was trying to there we go.
alright. The order is going to be case, then case, like proper, then hedge. We'll, if I have time, I'll touch. No, actually, we'll go on framework. Just a tiny bit.
So case, proper, case hedge, and then framework?
So everyone got that? Everyone ready? This is a debate about debate because transition is coming out and there needs to be an actual competitive model that not only challenges and prepare all the participants for the transition. They have proceeded that transitions are occurring now, which means that it's about what you do in the interim of the transitions. What matters and what we say matters is because we create a new value system with the affirmative. And I'm now going on to hedge. Hedge is an ongoing transition war because the way we control the internal link of hedge because we say that this is unsustainable because it always requires a threat to combat and rally against. That's Shramsky 15. We say that hedge is dependent on the otherized threat, which means the individuals of the global south, and this can be seen over and over again with U.S. hegemony, how the coup d'etat in Chile, the coup d'etat in Honduras, the coup d'etat in El Salvador, these are all examples of how the global south has been affected by U.S. hegemony and how the U.S. hegemony continues to be violent towards the global south, especially black and brown people. And going on to, still on hedge, once again, you can vote there's no presumption argument, and they consider that reconceptualizing organizing is a good way to resist the hegemonic forces that exist in the debate. And there are a few reasons as to why they lose the hedge flow. One, first, it's not sustainable. The IMT evidence is also another warrant and does a pretty good job at outlining how 270 million people are facing food insecurity, how global ecological crises are completely ignored and are worsening now because of hegemony. There are protests in China, Chile, Guam, all around the world. 255 million jobs lost in 2021, and wars still happen. Wars are still occurring now, which takes out their peaceful nonsense. Sustainability debate was blipping in the tuner, and there's no warrant from the IMT card were answered, which is pretty good. The IMT does a pretty good job explaining why hedge is sustainable, and they say that there's no card on hegemony and sustainable linkage. But I mean, it's quite obvious, right? If hegemony is so sustainable, then scratch that. The linkage is obvious. The U.S. hegemony is a capitalist state that is predicated on capitalism as an economic system. And second, on the head debate, it's particularly violent to the global south. 500,000 communists were brutally murdered by the U.S. and they dropped this. And the killing of Gaddafi once again dropped. Sanctions sent to start people in self warfare. Like literally right now, there are sanctions in Russia that have literally like starved people to death. And all these prove that hegemony is not safe or reliable for black and brown people. They're just defending colonization. We have an impact turning materially and epistemologically. They also consider that Shrimpsky says that head can only be sustainable when they're someone to other. And we have re-highlighted both of their scenarios, and they consider both. You would consider I can very highlighting says that it says that unipolar system does not result in less imperialism because after World War II there was a unipolar system and there was constant war in nations. There was proxy wars and constant wars of imperialism, i.e. the scrambles from Africa. Fast forward to now, we live in a more liberal internationalist model of international politics, which means that wars of intervention still happen under a model of hegemony because they think that unipolarity is good. And concession of transition wars in order means that it's a try or die for resistance, not licking the boots of U.S. empire. Util debate is super light. First of all, they dropped our biggest turn on the utilitarian ethic that utilitarianism, because it's the most good for the most people, means that it ignores like small populations who have been literally genocided. That means indigenous populations, indigenous people get ignored in the utilitarian ethic, and aside from that, black people are also ignored in utilitarian ethic. I believe that was Bogues 10 that talked about how the utilitarian ethic never serves the slave. And we didn't consider distinction. It's true. But we have a counter model that is that you should have an anarcho-abolition to rethink how we evaluate black life, and that's literally the choice in the 1 hour overview. Your studies about how the world is never takes into account literally any example we gave you, which we should be telling on who should win this debate. Transition wars are already happening. The war on poor people is here, which they consider the protests are uniqueness that you consider were coming out of the IMT, and then which puts them behind on this debate and are inevitable. We shouldn't have leaders that starve nations for the sake of power. This consider how sanctions are uniquely violent. And gut check, they consider our examples and they have any justification for any of them because they can't. They're just neocons. You should feel uncomfortable fun for them. And there's an easy way out. The black imagination argument, it was on the frame subtraction tool on the 2AC, which is very damning for them. And now shifting any argument that says black imagination is good or can be good, but it's a very bad argument. Even if you don't buy that imagination argument or imagination, reimagining the world free from violence is a good step at organizing toward that vision, which means that the imagination of the affirmative at the end of the day is still a good idea. Even if you think there is a risk of nuclear war, which, there probably isn't, we have like real in-round examples of our impacts. Now going on to the framework flow. So first of all, they completing this handle our racial dysphoria DA on framework when they quite literally police black and brown debaters on the way to engage the resolution. They link to this DA when you can in which you can vote to wrap up the debate because these are material impacts. We see in this debate these little white debaters get up and tell new black and brown debaters that the only way they know how to engage the political and how to engage the resolution is not sufficient enough, which means that it causes racial dysphoria when these black and brown debaters leave the space or quit debate and feel like they are not sufficient enough to be engaged in the world, and they are left resourceless in a world that is more violent than the space. And that's time. Wait.
Not this time.